wanted to meet my buddies for the last picnic before everybody went back to school or back to work. You remember in those days, Labor Day was the day before before the falls stuff kicked in. So I left St. Louis Bertrand. I was on 580 in my Firebird driving towards West Oakland, got to the Grand Lake Theater right at Grand as we're going around that curve. James Taylor's song came on, You've Got a Friend, and I started tearing up. I didn't have a clue as to why I was crying. I thought that, those we've all made seals. You know how exhausting those things are. I thought maybe I was just tired. But I'm saying all that to say this. 2 days later, I called Ralph and said, are you still looking for a teacher? And I went into teaching, never went to law school. 9 years later, I returned to the seminary. I believe, and again, I've shared this story over and over again, I believe that the cursillo I made in 1971, Labor Day weekend 1971, led me back to the seminary in 1980. That's my cursillo story. So I re-entered the seminary in 1980. Again, I was a Black seminarian there at that time. He was leaving the seminary as I was coming in. Father Ken Westray of San Francisco. I was there, enjoyed it, loved the experience. I was 31 when I re-entered. The only couple of experiences that I had when my Blackness was an issue. One was that I was assigned to St. Leander's in San Leandro in my first year in 1980, 1981. And I was told to always wear my collar when I was in San Leandro, but there was a very real possibility that the police would stop me, and which was not a surprise for me because the police had stopped me, as the deacon said, when I was a younger adult. So I always wore my collar. The people there were wonderful. There were a lot of the Portuguese parish at that time, a significant Portuguese parish, and we had a lot of funerals. And so since I couldn't do the funerals, I was a seminarian, Father Mangini would have me do the rosaries. So it wasn't unusual for me to be over at, there are two big mortuaries on Estudillo. Santos Robinson, I think is one, I forget what the other one is. So I would 2-3 days a week, I was doing a rosary in the evening, and it wasn't unusual that a person would step back out and look at the door to make sure they were in the right place. It says my internet is unstable. Is that true? Can somebody tell me, am I unstable or not?
A little bit.
Yes, you are.
Yeah,
stable.
a little bit, Father.
What can I do to make it less unstable? Nothing? Just go with it?
No, nothing really.
Okay, well, let me get through it. So it was not unusual that one of our Portuguese Catholic would step in, see me doing the rosary, and assume they were in the wrong place, and would say things like, after the rosary was over, they would say to me, "It was really beautiful. You speak English so well." It cracked me up that they would assume that I would not be able to speak English well. But as I said, my experience was good. I was student body president in the seminary. The only unusual thing about that was that it wasn't unusual for my brother seminarians to introduce me to strangers as their Black student body president, as if people couldn't tell. So little things like that. When it came time for ordination, Bishop John Cummins knew that I wanted to be a priest to serve the whole Diocese of Oakland, and I didn't want to be a priest who was relegated to only serving in the Black community. So my first assignment was at St. Pascal's in the Oakland Hills. My next assignment was in the inner city of Oakland, St. Andrew, St. Joseph in West Oakland. I taught at St. Columba Elementary School at the same time. And then in 1995, I got one of the best assignments of my life. I was sent to Antioch to St. Ignatius in Antioch, and I met a wonderful community there. Folks who every time I see them, they know how much I love them. I'm looking at a couple of them right now, but it was a great experience. But something happened while I was there. It was early on. It was 1995, and it was when the O.J. Simpson trial was going on. And as you know, that went throughout the summer and into the fall. And I think the decision was made around October. And I was living in a rectory with a wonderful guy, one of my best friends. His name was Father Vince Cotter. And Vincent every day was watching the trial. You know, remember that trial was on TV. And I, to the extent that I could avoid it, I was avoiding it. But I had to cook dinner. I was a cook. So often while I was cooking, Vincent was watching the trial or watching the news around the trial. And the night before the verdict was cast, was delivered, we were told that the verdict was going to be delivered the next day. And to my shock and amazement, Vincent voiced for the first time in a very excited way how, you know, that OJ was guilty and, you know, and he was going to get justice was going to be served. And, you know, we had never talked about it. I too believe that OJ was guilty, but I taught American civics for 12 years. And what I had learned in civics class about how our judicial system worked was that a person had to be convicted beyond a reasonable doubt. And I felt that OJ's attorneys had been good enough to get him off, even though he was guilty. So I realized that the next day, it wasn't going to be cool to be around the rectory, depending on how the verdict was going to come down. So I had 8 o'clock mass. Then I went to my local barbershop in Pittsburgh. And when I was there, there was a news reporters were in the barbershop. It was a Black barbershop. And the news reporter was interviewing the folks, the barbers, and to a person, they all said OJ was innocent. And then the news reporters asked me my thoughts, and I said, I think OJ is guilty, which you could have heard a pin drop when I said that. But I said, but I believe he will be found not guilty because they didn't prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. Well, the brothers, let me just say, the brothers were not pleased with me. And so I left the barbershop, rode around in my car until the verdict was delivered. And then I called an old girlfriend because I didn't feel bad that this man who I thought was guilty had gotten away with murder. Am I a racist? And she says, no, Leo, you're racial. It's telling me it's unstable again. I apologize if I'm breaking up a lot. She says, no, Leo, you're racial. And that really struck me, that a lot of the people that we deal with aren't racist. What they are is racial. And we just have to accept that in this multi-culture that we live in as Americans, a lot of us are racial. I mean, my brothers and sisters who are Filipina are racial in the sense that you have feelings, thoughts, ideas about the Filipino community that you might not necessarily have about some other ethnic group. That doesn't mean that we can't be fair, but I think that's important to acknowledge that. So the following weekend, Father Vince asked me to preach at all the masses because he was upset. And I preached to the community. These are folks I had just met about 4 months before. And I said, you have to understand that I look at the world through Black eyes, and many of you look at the world through white eyes. I was talking primarily to the white parishioners. And I said, for many of you, you find it hard to believe that a police officer would do something illegal. Where I come from, we find it very easy to believe that police could corrupt evidence, that police would do something to make sure that a person was convicted. My experiences, I can't keep count of how many experiences I've had with friends who were just messed with by the police just because they were Black. So I told them that we need to understand that in this country, we look at the world through different eyes, and that we have to accept that in order to get to the place we need to get to in our country, we have to begin to try to look at the world through the eyes of our brothers and sisters, which is very much what you guys are trying to do this evening. So agree with the verdict. Most of them thought that OJ was guilty. And like I said, I think they're right in their thinking. But I was there for 4.5 years. And then in 1999, to my shock and amazement, Bishop Cummins appointed me the pastor of Corpus Christi in Piedmont. I don't think there's a parish in the diocese that's more white than Corpus Christi. It is parts of the parish is quite wealthy. It's a parish that was generally given to a Monsignor who had put in years of good service. I didn't apply for the assignment. I knew I was going to get an assignment, but John Cummins, when I asked him why he was doing it, he said that he felt that I was the right priest for this assignment. The parish had become younger. They had a school. I was a former teacher. He thought I'd worked very well with the kids and with the young families. And he said, even though Corpus Christi has a Piedmont address, it is actually an Oakland parish. And he wanted it to be the preeminent parish of Oakland. When my brother priests found out about this, they were up in arms. At least 12 of those guys, my brother priests had applied for this assignment, and they were quite upset that it was given to me. As one said, why would you give a white parish to a Black priest? I came here in June of 1999, and what is it now? November of 2020. It's been a wonderful 21 years. I've grown to love the folks of this parish family. My only regret is that there is not a significant number of Filipino Catholics in this parish. No one celebrates Mass like Filipinos. And Filipinos would not be upset with the fact that I never start Mass on time. These white folks, they get a little upset when you don't start, when you're a little late. But I do miss that, the Filipino Catholic experience, which you know is unique. But it's been a good 21 years. I haven't had too many problems. A couple times when I was closing the church at night, it dawned on me that, one of these young police officers here in Piedmont, not knowing who I am, might accidentally confront me or maybe even try to harm me. One trying to open church doors, but that hasn't happened. I'm grateful for that. But as I share with my white brothers, not one of them have ever had that experience where they had to worry about getting shot by the police at night because the police didn't think they belonged in a certain place. It hasn't happened. I've had good experiences, but that is something that every Black male has to concern himself with. And that's not only exclusive to Black males, but it is something that we do worry about. So let me segue. I spent a lot of time talking about me. Let me go at it this way. The issue of race is real in our country. There is a great book that I would invite you to read. It's called Caste, C-A-S-T-E, Caste. And it's written by a woman named Isabel Wilkerson. Isabel Wilkerson, W-I-L-K-E-R-S-O-N, Wilkerson. And her hypothesis is that America has developed a caste system very much like the one that exists in India, and that there are people who are on the top and that there are people who are not on the top or who are on the bottom. And that's in America. That is part of the American experience. And at the very beginning of the book, she states this. She writes that there were no white people until America was discovered. Think about that. Before there was an America, if you were English, you were English. You were French, you were French. If a person was German, they were German. White, the ethnic separation of based upon color was a result of the American experience. I know that for some of you, even though the Philippines have been closely tied to the United States for, since post, right after the right before the First World War, I know that there are Filipinos who come here and don't understand the history of racism, but I would imagine that the Filipino cast to the bottom, to be cast on the bottom, where the Spanish, when they dominated the Philippines, they made a clear distinction between those who were indigenous to the Philippines and those who came to rule over the Philippines. I'm not sure. I know this is true for Hispanics. I know it's true for Blacks, but in the Filipino community, do folks give weight to color, like a lighter Filipino as opposed to a darker Filipino? So it exists within the community. My sister's nodding her head. So when we look at the racial issue in the United States, when I think of let's stay with the Filipinos and Filipinas. I met a significant number of Filipinos when I was assigned to St. Ignatius in Antioch. And the experience I had, and Celso and Clarita can speak to this, but the experience that I had was that many of the folks I met, either they or their family members had come from the Philippines, and they stopped in Daly City, and they bought maybe their first home or rented their first place in Daly City. They eventually brought other family members over. And then when they did a little bit better economically, they moved to Antioch, or they moved to San Ramon. Well, that's the second or third generation moving to San Ramon. But what I'm getting at is that when they came here, they experienced discrimination. There's just no way they didn't. If they were brown, and they're looking at the people I'm looking at, there were folks who would have discriminated against you. The difference that your experience is that you had roots. In other words, the Filipinos who came here often